everybody. We are so excited that you're here and that you are joining us for our last session of the day. And it is not the least session. I am so excited to be here hosting this amazing panel of speakers. Ken Peterson, who, raise your hand, Ken. If you didn't notice, this is Ken, and he is our president of research and insights, and we are so excited for him to be here. We have Manjiri, who's, I only practiced her first name.
Not bad.
And she has over 20 years of experience in loyalty research, corporate communications, and corporate brand repositioning. And so we cannot wait to hear some of her stories from the field. I'm sure she has a few good like high lows and awkwards that she could talk about. And then lastly, we have Nune, whose first name I also was the only part I practiced.
Oh, it's actually really good.
Thanks. I tried. And she is a fashion designer, an event producer, and a market researcher up in the Pacific Northwest for Lux Insights, having worked in market research since 2009, specializing in quantitative research, and has been a nationally televised, published, and award-winning fashion designer. So, woo!
And my daughter loves her fashions.
I love that. Oh, and Manjiri. Everybody, this is phenomenal.
What is happening?
Was I not supposed to find this information on the internet?
Oh, I thought my bio was going to have a research focus, but here we are.
Sorry. I thought it was really fun. I said quantitative once. And we are just so excited for you guys to be here. And if you as attendees and viewers have any questions, make sure you put them in the Q&A window because we want to answer them. And if you want to follow us on LinkedIn, we'll be posting this chat later if you have to drop. We know it's a little late for some people. For some people, it's the middle of the day. So we are so glad that you're all able to join us. So let me share my screen just as a starting off point on what we're going to be talking about today. And let's start with some misconceptions. So what do you think are some of the big misunderstandings when it comes to CX research? And Nune, since I introduced you last, I'll start with you first.
Sure. I mean, I'm sure Manjiri will have a lot more to add specific to this, but I think when people hear CX research, they think NPS trackers, and they think having to deal with long, complex contact lists from clients. And I don't think that it has to be that way at all. So we've approached customer experience in lots of different ways, whether it's from qualitative, kind of different approaches to even the tracking, but incorporating ad hoc sections and tracking studies to help kind of meet the needs of the clients for what is kind of in that zeitgeist, so that the insights are getting irrelevant. So
interesting. Manjiri, follow up?
Ooh. I agree with what Nune said, but I think one of the biggest misconceptions is I think companies tend to do research and try to understand research based on how they are structured internally. So for example, if you have a retail store and you have an online presence and you have a call center, I think everyone looks at the CX research within these different divisions as separate entities. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think the whole thing is the customer experience, and it's their experience with your brand and how you are delivering on your brand promise. And if you have a more holistic view, you actually understand what that customer experience is.
So from like a layman's perspective on customer experience, it's like, okay, we're going to do customer experience on the call center and we're going to do it on the product. But really it's all of those things put together. And instead of saying, well, you do customer experience for this segment, we need to make sure that it's like almost like how we do branding on a global level. Like it covers the whole company. Like you need to do CX from almost the very high level.
Yeah. And how you are structured is not how the customer experiences you. So you have to get at it from the customer side, not from your point of view. And I think that's most important.
And I'll also
add follow-up.
Yeah, I was going to say another thing that I think a lot of people forget is that humans are very emotional people, and a lot of our relationships with brands, a lot of our memories of how we've experienced brands come from kind of an emotional place. And so I think we forget to measure the emotional part of the customer experience as well. So I think the emotional attributes and features are also really important when you're measuring brand success.
Cool. Ken, you haven't said anything?
Well, I'll even go a step further. I mean, from an operational perspective, I've spent so many years getting these huge programs, and Nune and Manjiri have always been part of that through the years in my, when we were working together in some capacity. But I think everyone forgets that, we're talking about CX research. Fielding the research isn't where it stops. It's the action you take after that. And I've seen a client go from, they had this horrible number. It was top 3 box percentage, but it wasn't about what they measured at that point. It was what they did with it, and they always wanted to improve it because having a 90% wasn't good enough for them. They wanted 95%. They wanted to push that limit, and if you don't do that just by measuring, you actually take action after the fact. So it's bringing, as Manjiri said, bringing everyone across from multiple cross-functional groups and departments to make it happen.
I love that. That's great. Now, and I'll take us back to that. Like, are there any misconceptions that you guys get as CX researchers even? Do people think that you do like what's like the most bizarre way someone's explained your job back to you?
Someone thinks I run call centers.
That's terrible. I don't think anyone has ever explained what I do. Like, they're like, oh yeah, she does research, and people ask them, well, what does that mean? They're like, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. So I don't know if that's yours.
No one has explained to me what I do, which means they don't understand, which means they think I don't do anything like labor. We'll see.
Okay, I mean, that's my mom once when I was like, oh, I do marketing. She's like, my daughter just writes tweets all day. I was like, that is not what I do.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
I was like, okay, cool guys, cool. But I always find that funny when people.
Right?
Oh yes, it was worse when I was like, when I used to work in blockchain, she used to try to explain that, and that was not good at all. So I'd rather be writing tweets than that. But I think that sometimes those misconceptions around what people think our jobs are often go down into what how they view it when they're out in the world, because it's like, oh well, I got this research. That's what Nune does. I guess I'll do it. Or I got the survey. And you're like, okay. Let's fill out the survey. But let's keep going then, so we don't, have too much downtime. How do I get to the next one? Challenges. Here we go. Misconceptions to challenges. When getting large-scale programs up and running, what are some battles that happen within an organization? And I like how you use the word battles, Ken.
It is a battle sometimes. I'm sure I'm
sure somebody has some, we don't want anyone to call anyone out or throw anyone under the bus, but then I'm sure you got some stories.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, big ones. I mean, we mentioned cross-functional before, but I've even had the challenge of, we had someone who wanted to run customer experience surveys, and it's in a very small marketplace. And they said, but we don't have a list of our customers. So you're going to have to just survey general population. And it's amazing. I mean, that's an extreme example, but it's amazing how often we approach that and say, oh, this challenge is not uncommon in that they don't know how to get their customer data. They don't know who to go to in the organization. They don't know who owns the CRM. Does it go to IT? Does it go to marketing? And it's shocking how often we come across something like that. It's hard to talk to your customers if you don't know who they are.
Ken, that's insane.
I definitely won't name names.
For anything that's this large scale, and I've done programs that have been, like quite complex, like panel and client supplied lists combined with 42 languages across 100 countries. So I've been down that path, and I've also done really simple ones that are one market, contact list. And I think from my experience, there's three main challenges. The first main challenge has to do with timelines. It's how much do they want to do in what amount of time? And I think one of the things that's really difficult is if you have a multi-language account and you have a long fieldwork period in order to make sure that you have enough time for recruitment, then the time becomes an issue. So I think that's one of those first conversations that you need to have that we end up having, is trying to figure out like, hey, like, what are your timeline restrictions, and how can we build something that fits your needs that can work and function within those? The second really big challenge that comes up is trying to determine whether or not you or the client is actually going to be deploying the sample. Due to a lot of legal issues surrounding the handling of PII, or personally identifiable information, it makes it really logistically difficult to get into a place where you're the one deploying the sample from the client. And there's a lot of issues that come from that. I think recruitment is one of the biggest battles, whether it's for qualitative or quantitative customer experience measurement. And so if you're the one sending out, there's a whole list of issues that come with that, whether it's, having to deal with hard bounce backs, emails not going where they need to go, having to draft the right subject line, having to have the right link that doesn't get rejected, dealing with survey support issues, all of those things. And then not to mention the potential weeks of time that it takes just to get through all the legal documentation in order to give you permission to even touch the sample, right? And then having to deal with anonymity. Of course, we usually recommend the client deploys their own sample, and that also has its own complications, right? Ensuring that they send out the pre-notes and the invites and reminders correctly. So all of those things in deployment are a battle in and of itself. So I think the recruitment is a big battle. Like, we're working on one account right now where we're trying to recruit high net worth individuals, and it's becoming quite an issue because the contact list from customers are really small. So you can imagine it's not going to have really high quantitative results. So in a multi-phase approach, at what point do you exhaust that list and reach a point of harassment where you're no longer allowed to touch the contact list anymore, right? I mean, these are people that are making a lot of money and they're getting like 15 text messages from you. It's kind of embarrassing.
Hello?
And then, of course, I think, the last challenge is, what do you do in situations where you have to find contacts for a client that they don't have a customer list, or they need to supplement their customer list with something. And one of the ways that I have approached it in my past is I've actually used geo-tracking. So there's geolocation data out there, and you're able to actually triangulate locations for people and set boundaries around retail locations. So if you're lucky enough that the client you have is a retailer, and you're able to tag retail locations, you can actually target participants who enter and leave geo-triggered zones and spend a certain amount of time in them in order to validate whether or not at that point they've even shopped or seen or interacted with that brand, from which point you can actually then trigger a CX survey. So I would say those are the three main kind of challenges that I faced when it comes to like really large scale operations specific to customer experience, but I'll also open it up to Manjiri as well. I'm sure she's got a lot of stories to tell.
I was like, I have a follow-up question also.
Yeah.
After all the, I'll just put it down. Are you guys struggling? Because we're struggling with this in marketing with the new Apple privacy settings, because our email open rates have gone down, trying to we're getting we don't get our spam, we don't get spam counted, but it just doesn't make it to them. Have you guys in your recruiting seen any issues with all the new privacy settings people are rolling out?
I think that a lot of the times, even when our clients will send out emails to their customer list, sometimes, most of the time, those emails will end up in the junk box. Yeah. And it just has to do either with how the link is drafted, or what the subject line has in it, or what the email body is, or it just gets tagged. So it either is, unfortunately, a more it's a slower effort on the client side, where they have to reach out from an account perspective, from an account level, or you just have to have the mass. You just have to have the quantity of people that you can send the emails out to get a small percentage. I mean, we've had response rates literally go anywhere from 0.8% to which was a complete miracle situation. I would say usually it caps at like 20, which is like highly, highly amazing. But we actually had one client who reached out to their customer list. We were aiming for about 100 completes. So it wasn't really that large. And they had a 40% response rate, which was unheard of in my time. So, and all of their feedback was super positive too, which I was like, are you guys just like #winning? Like, what are you doing that we can also do?
I love that. Manjiri, what are some of the challenges you're facing?
Ooh. So I just want to step back a little bit, because I think most of the smaller challenges come from these two big challenges and my pet peeves, right? So one, I feel CX research is not just about measurement. I think Ken talked about it, right? It's not a report. It should not end at being a report card for how you're doing. You have to ask the why. And if you don't have that A grade, you need to figure out how to get there. So how do you get to where you want to be? And why are people saying what they're saying? I think people focus so much on the actual score, less on the why behind that score, which is the whole point of CX research. And I think you tend to miss that, especially the larger the organization and the more units or divisions or departments involved from the organization. I think everyone just starts looking at the numbers and just wants to get, a 90 or a 95 or a 97. You just don't know, but what is that actual experience?
Right.
And two, I think, how do you assign incentives if you are going to use it as a report card, right? Because incentives is what will make human beings stick always. And I think you have to make sure that people are being incentivized and being held responsible for things that they can actually change. Because if you are being incentivized on something that you can do nothing about, you're just going to say, I don't even care about it, which it beats the whole purpose of your CX program. So it's a little bit more, a top view of it. But I think a lot of the smaller challenges we have would just go away if everyone was aligned properly on the purpose of doing this and how they would do it. So,
hot take, Manjiri. Just align everyone properly. Ken, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there are just so many more challenges than what they've talked about, and the one that still stands out to me, and as we're leading into the mistakes part, I think of the emails. And early on in my career, people didn't think about things like email security. And we had one client who they were sending out the invitations themselves. That's a good thing. We reviewed the invitations and we approved the text because we didn't want to bias it. That's a good thing. The bad thing is these were to their internal employees, their internal stakeholders, and they sent out, without telling us, social security numbers in the emails. And I'm just, as you can imagine, their employees had a lot of pushback, and about 80% of the responses were, I cannot believe you sent me an email with my social security number. And that was all we got. So it was employee experience, but it was related to the customer experience, and it just went horribly wrong. And so we weren't able to really actually complete that research that we had spent about 3 months ramping up for.
Do sometimes your customer or your clients, do they become your biggest challenge sometimes?
No, I love my
No, what are you saying?
Deep pause, everyone.
No, I've been very lucky. I think that there's always been, reviewing everybody I have worked with, I think they've always ended up being great colleagues and great friends. So yeah, it's about how you navigate the tougher parts, which actually makes the relationship even better, I feel. So it's always enough.
Yeah, I'm with Manjiri. I think it has to do with how you set up the program. I think, yes, I mean, there's a lot of difficulties, right? If there's budget restrictions, timeline restrictions, if there's restrictions on what they can do or what they know how to do. But I think if you just take the time up front and you anticipate in your timelines all the things that could go wrong based on your experience of everything that has gone wrong, you'll be fine.
I love
And then
that.
they push back on the timelines and say, we don't need 2 weeks to approve the survey.
Ken is just the Debbie Downer of this.
Ken, this is what you do. You tell them, hey, we can do this in a week, but you'll have 1 day to review. If you need more time, then we need more time.
Exactly.
We move quickly on our end.
I love that. Well, Ken kind of spoiled it. If anybody was listening, he gave away the next topic in his answer, which is mistakes. You know, what's that oops moment? I mean, I definitely did that even with X Day yesterday. I sent out an email on right time, wrong day. So yesterday, everybody got an alert at 2:50 that was like, join the CX in 10 minutes. And I was like,
oh my gosh.
It is in 10 minutes tomorrow.
Well, join as Ray, Crystal, so I think we're fine.
I was just like, oh man, that was, you know, but that's just, we were using a new platform. We've never used it before. And it was just one of those things that happened. I was like, that was not the schedule button. And so what are some mistakes, or let's call them learning experiences, Ken, that you guys have really taken with you, maybe even for early in your career? There are some things that have stuck with you.
One of my favorites. Oh, go ahead, Manjiri.
For me, it's all about like pay attention to the data and the setup. Nothing else really matters beyond that. Spend time on it and understand your data, because I think a lot of the issues that we see are because of a lack of understanding on how you would set up the data, right? And I think 80% of everything you do is cleaning up the data to get it to where you want it to report it. I think not spending enough time on data structuring, data analysis would be one of the bigger mistakes.
Yeah, I'll actually add to what Manjiri is saying. I think taking preventative measures to avoid being in an oops situation, especially in a client-facing oops situation, is very important. Taking that time before you launch to make sure that not just the survey text and the survey logic is fully exhausted, but also that the data structure, that setup is exhausted, that you have all of the checks ready to go for you to monitor and track progression in field, not just for each target, but each soft quota, to make sure you're watching every response and every cell that comes in and what it looks like. And those things don't have to be manual. All those things can be automated. And those checks can only have to take 5 seconds, but they need to happen daily. Because if something goes wrong and it's the end of field and you have to go back to client and say, hey, we need more time, like that's a major oops moment. If you're able to catch it and fix it before the client knows, then you're fine. So I think 100%, I think data quality and data assurance, testing time, making sure that you have enough time built in, but also resources built in to make sure that all of those checks are there, especially for tracking studies. Being paired enough not to trust anything, including yourself, right? But then I'm happy to share a couple of oops moments that I think were my favorite. I would think my first one is I was working with a high-profile tech software client on a CX study, and it took us 3 months to finalize their survey because they had to keep going back to their stakeholders and re-reviewing it. And once we were finally there, it was finally ready to go. We finally got their contact list and we launched and everything was awesome. And a week into field work, we get an email saying, please stop. Like urgent, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Like we sent you the wrong list. Please stop. We need to send you a different list. We're like, what do you mean you sent us the wrong list? How does that happen? But that was probably one of my favorites. Yeah. And then, of course, things that happen all the time, like you've got a bunch of sample to deal with. You're doing an A/B test. Everything pre-field is awesome. You soft launch, and turns out that everybody got the wrong setup. And so you have to pull a new sample on a Thursday night at 8 p.m. with your vendor, and you have to fix it. And it has to be right the next day. So, there's always things like that do happen.
For sure. Ken, what about you? Your lifelong CXing.
She mentioned one word, soft launch, because I could tell you 1,000 stories someone that just said, all right, we're going to send it. And this is customers. I mean, it's a little different when you're using panel data and you send something wrong to 1,000 panelists versus sending something wrong to 1,000 customers. And soft launch is so critical because you want to get the first 5, 15, 30 out before, make sure you didn't send something that, like maybe a social security number in the email or something, make sure you don't make those mistakes that, I think the other thing is look at it from, look at your CX measurement process, view it as both it's not just a process that for your client that you're dealing with, view it as part of the customer experience journey for your customers and make sure you're viewing it from the customer point of view. I recall this one, we were doing telephone calls to customers. I know it seems archaic nowadays, and it wasn't actually that long ago. But in doing the telephone calls to the customers, we just had a list and no time zones. And as a result,
that's a risky business.
The call center vendor probably could have bounced it across an area code / time zone checklist, but they failed to do that. And nowadays with people on mobile phones, I think the biggest complaint I got, we ended up contacting some guy he was in Southeast Asia. It was the middle of the night, and we're calling him on his mobile phone, and he picks up thinking it's some emergency from the US and was very upset with us because that call probably cost him about $40. So, keep those things in mind as you build this out. The customer's part of this process.
For sure. Sorry, I was trying to get a view from our viewers' perspective, so I wanted to push you up. That's crazy. I feel like that is definitely hard these days when you are trying to just get a hold of people in the right moment, because that's all what it's about. Even for events like this, it's about making sure you grab people in that instance where they're interested, have capacity, have time, are in the right place. There's so many environmental elements that affect, I'm sure, how we take our surveys, how people respond to brands and the experience that they are in at the moment, and coming to events like this. So that definitely can, hopefully, doing what Nune said about prepping things ahead of time and taking 5 minutes to double check, just even the littlest things are definitely can save you a lot of heartache down the line, either for you or your customer. So let's go on to the next. We've got brutal truth. What sometimes do you have to have tough conversations? And does it end up being a little bit more like therapy? And if you looked back at the beginning of your career, what is one piece of advice you'd give your younger self? Ken? Manjiri?
Spend enough time on designing the program, not running the program, because that is key. Is spend enough time, detailed time, on how you're going to set it up. The rest of it is easy. It's the initial stuff that really tells you if you're going to get what you want from your program.
So
otherwise,
you're
happy with it.
Doing as much pre-work as you can.
Yeah. You have to be somewhere between the legal team and the sales team. Go, and then select, no, let's just step back and read through every word. I think there has to be somewhere in between, but do that and you'll be fine.
I love that.
And I love the teams, but no.
I would say probably, I would tell myself proactive insights, focus on proactive insights and start it early. Because in the end, the success of each program with every client, yes, it needs to run operationally smooth. Yes, the data needs to be accurate. We need to make time for that. But what's more important is if the input isn't awesome, then the output's not going to be awesome either. So it's spending the time in consultation with your client to ensure that what you have going into the program is as close to perfect as you can get it, which means that it's not just the one client, your point of contact has seen it, but also that you have actually spent the time to workshop a design session with their stakeholders, so that everybody who is going to be involved in digesting the materials has a say in what the materials are going to be. And then, of course, taking the time once the data starts coming in, start thinking about storytelling early. And I mean, like early, like you launch, you want to see what the numbers are saying. Like if you got enough people, like just start thinking about it, start having brainstorming sessions internally, because when you get to the results, in the end, it's about the recommendations you make. And it's not, you know, here's the number and here's how it's moved, you know, it's, hey, like this is how you're performing in this landscape. Here's what people are saying about you. Here's what that actually means. And here's what you should actually do as a business in order to see these numbers improve, in order to do this, and be more bold about making recommendations like that. So I think I would say the storytelling and those proactive insights are really kind of the way to go. In the end, the success of the project is based on the success of the outcome.
Yeah, and that actually leads in great. I don't know if you guys were on for our keynote this morning. It was the head of corporate sales at Google talking about how she uses storytelling to really just move her decisions forward, and how we can all be great storytellers to make decisions happen, you know. And that was really like, thanks, Nune, bringing it all around.
Anytime. I don't know. You can bring me anytime you want. Happy to contribute.
Ken, and what about you? What would you tell your 21-year-old self?
I don't know. I was still in college.
Okay, 22.
I think early on, I think it sort of ties into, I wouldn't call it a mistake. I was always trying to make sure that, you know, we were meeting the client's needs constantly, which is a very important thing to do. But the one thing I'd probably give myself that piece of truth is that sometimes you do need to push back. You know, I've let surveys go into field that were, 20, 25 minutes long.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it's, I'm sure we all have a few of those, actually. I know that, but it is about, making sure that you're not just doing what they ask, but also doing what's right. What will get you to the goals. And I think that's the other part, is always ask that goal up front. If I have someone that comes to me and says, hey, we just want to run an NPS study because it's important, I'm like, well, tell me your goal. I mean, even if your goal is just to improve NPS, like running a study is not a goal. Running a study is a task.
That's true. Any follow-ups on that? Running a goal is not a study. Running a goal is a task.
Yeah, it's not just about measurement. It's about what you do with it and why you're doing it.
And telling stories.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you guys. So many good nuggets. I know our social media team is sitting in the background just being like, so let's keep going. And I guess I didn't know how many slides there were. Surprise. Do you have any CX stories in the audience? I know I see Carl, I see Greg, I see John. I know there's some CX practitioners sitting in here. So let us know in the comments if you have anything you'd like to share. I can invite you to the stage, but also Manjiri, tell us a little bit about just one of your best CX wins. I know we've been talking a lot about, what went wrong and what you can learn, but tell us about that moment you were just so proud to be a CX researcher or work in CX.
Ooh. So I remember working for a retailer once, and we were really thinking about why their scores were dipping, why employee scores were dipping, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And then on the other hand, there was also a lot of feedback saying that things are out of stock. And the client kept on saying that things are not out of stock because our inventory systems show that it's there. And then we were able to actually look at the employee scores and look at the employee experience research in tandem with the CX research. And we found out they actually had nobody to bring the stock from the back office up to the shelves, right? So if you're looking at it from a CX perspective, you think out of stock is our biggest problem. Oh, maybe it's the supply chain. I don't know what's going on, but that wasn't actually the problem. But being able to link it to everything else that's going on and being able to understand different types of research that were going on. And it's all data. It's all about your experience, your customer's experience, your employee's experience. And just to be able to find that and fix it was one of the biggest wins. It was for 10 days, it was really hard to get to that point because we couldn't figure out what was going on. But I think just it was one of the best things I had done in research, because that really tells you how you should use the data that you're getting. And, the measure is not it's why it's happening and can you fix it. And I think that was one of the best stories I have. It's one of the smallest stories, but the most fulfilling, because we actually fixed something. And
intangibly, you could see it. You're like, the shelves are full.
And people didn't blame the wrong thing for what was going on. That's also important, right? Like you need to know the why, and you need to know the accurate why. And I think that was one of the I'll never forget that story. It was just a very interesting piece of analysis.
I love that. That's great. Nune, what makes you excited to be a CX researcher in the mornings? Like what makes your heart bubble?
Oh, well, me saying I do CX a portion of the time, but I also do a lot of other stuff nice. in the research space, including working with startups and helping them segment their audiences and run segmentations, do concept testing and package tests, and a bunch of other things. But in the CX space, one of the things that really made me feel great about doing the research that I'm doing is working with accessibility and people that have accessibility needs. And I'll give you an example of one of those. I mean, I think always having a client email you at the end of the day or on the presentation when you're presenting or workshopping with the stakeholders, having people say, this is amazing, like, this is awesome, like, oh my gosh, I didn't think of it this way. Like, that makes research worth it. That makes it fun for me. But I think also what's really fulfilling is being able to work with customers that want to make changes and actually implement changes for things like helping people with accessibility. So working with one large software organization that also has retail locations. They wanted to run a study across all of their customers that have accessibility needs, and looking specifically at people with hearing disabilities, people with physical disabilities, and then people that have blindness, and being able to collect feedback from those participants and hearing their perspective, knowing from interacting with them that they feel like they're making a huge difference for their community. That was really powerful. And then sharing that information with the client and going back to the client and hearing that they're actually making changes based on the feedback we've provided, like, that's really great. So yeah, I would say definitely client feedback.
I love that. And Ken, what makes you just I know you've done CX for a long time, you've done research for a long time, you've been in operations for you've done a lot of things for a long time, I guess. What still makes you just excited to, not only, I was going to be cheeky a bit, what makes you excited to work at QuestionPro, but what makes you excited to just be in research? And when you're like, wow, that was a win, and you just feel that pride, what's one of your stories behind that?
And I have a lot of stories associated with this one, but it's when you know that you've nailed that connection, when you're presenting to a stakeholder or presenting to someone on the client side that just went, wow, I mean, this resonates. This is the problem. And we had that recently, and this was a little bit more operational in nature, where we were helping them get the program up and running. And, there was a lot of struggles. They had, I think, 9 surveys that they were trying to get out into the field immediately, all at one time. And they had all sorts of different patterns. And then they kept hitting us about, well, we got to get the data export. We got to do. And when I just walked them through and I said, well, okay, we have the data sitting here in these dashboards. And it was just like, wait, you already have it built in. We don't have to export it. And it's like, well, who are you working with that you have to export it? And so, and I, it turned out, I mean, they were working with a company that had the tools, the dashboards, but they they didn't take the time to show them how to set it up. They didn't take the time to show them this is what's going to be meaningful. And, you know, as soon as I went through that and I said, you don't have to show every question to every employee. You should show this to the pharmacy employees. You should show this to the store managers. And, you know, just that, you know, that moment when she goes, you guys are so awesome. I'm like, that makes my cake. I mean, I don't need a lot, but, you know, and so I've got tons of those over the years where it's just, you know, you either, you know, you turned on the switch for them and they go, wow, now I get it. And, or just even little things that, you know, where we have great things to offer at QuestionPro. So.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to stop screen sharing since we're almost at time, but I just wanted to kind of go through and say, you know, like if you guys were going to give someone a piece of like knowledge to change their career, or like, you know, we have a lot of young researchers, we get a lot of people at X-Day, especially for in college. What would you say is like, if they're graduating or they're, you know, doing this, they're doing their studies, what would be your like cheat code to get them where they want to go? Or not cheat code, you know, support for, you know, working for the future. What's your piece of advice to new people entering research for the first time?
I can go first, I guess. Probably have a couple of different advices. Maybe I don't want to be too aggressive, but I'd start with be flexible in your mind and think quickly. And I say that because every client's different. You're not always going to deliver something in PowerPoint. You're not always going to draft a survey in MS Word. It's not always going to be the same thing. They're not always going to want results in Excel, right? So be flexible. That's one thing, and agile. So in that respect, like we have to be creative and innovative thinkers as researchers, because every client comes with a different research objective and a different business objective. The second piece of advice I would say is learn the tools you have, because if you are comfortable with the tools you have, that enables you to be a better craftsman, right? So it just goes without saying. It's one thing to try to carve a statue out of stone with one tool, but if you have many tools, it makes it much easier. And then, of course, the third thing is recommendations matter, insights matter. Like in the end, what we're doing is we're curating insights. That's what makes us good at what we do. Anybody can go and work with a panel provider. Anybody can draft a survey badly, but they can still do it, right? So, you know, the reason that we're researchers is because we provide our expertise and we provide our insights, our recommendations, and our consultative kind of nature. That's what we add. Like Ken was saying, giving them those like, oh my God, aha moments that they didn't know that they could have. So I would say those would be the three big recommendations.
Nune, I should have had you on a panel earlier with Ray Pointer talking about the the democratization of research, because there's a big movement, and I think we're going to be talking about it next year for X-Day a lot, about DIYing research. And you know, anybody, like you said, anybody can make a survey, but can they really take actionable insights from the data that they've gathered? So that's, I like it a lot. Put your comments in the back of my brain for later. Manjiri, what would you tell someone jumping into research for the first time?
Well, I think understand the data. I think data is the most important thing, and you have to know how to handle it. Learn the tools you need to understand that data. And it doesn't have, it's not just for research, for anything that you do. Just know how to get the data to speak to you. And that includes actual data analysis. It includes understanding enough of the mathematics and the stats to ask the data the right question, because I think that's the most important. You know, you'll get an answer, but the question has to be right. And then the data should be able to give you the answers. And the second thing is, building expertise takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens with the small tasks. It happens with the small programs. It happens with your small teams. So yeah, make sure that you don't you don't ignore the smaller tasks and the learnings that you get along the way. And it all has to stack on top of each other. It doesn't just happen overnight. You can't go from 0 to awesome in 60 seconds.
What? And Ken, what about for you?
Well, and I'll preface this by saying I was a mathematics major. So I dealt with a lot with logic, and I tell people if they're in college, number one, take a storytelling class of some sort, some writing, composition, or a speaking. Just learn how to tell stories. Formalize that process. And then I think the second one, and it's the complete opposite end. You're going from that creative side of the brain to the very structured and operational. Take a logic class. It doesn't have to be in mathematical logic. It can be computer logic. There's philosophy. But think, it teaches you how to think within the box, also outside of the box. And that's very critical in our industry, just to be able to find those solutions that sometimes you have to do within a package or think really creatively outside of it.
Wow, so many nuggets, you guys. I really appreciate it. I think we don't seem to have a ton of questions in the audience. I know that sometimes happens when you're the last panel of the day, but I could not think of better women and Ken who to close out this day. You guys really took, I don't know if you were hanging out in here all day, but you really hit the points of like every panel and just kind of like tied everything up in a bow. So I really appreciate it. And, I just am so thankful that you guys were able to contribute today. And Ken, you are just such a great leader in research here at QuestionPro. And so we are thankful that you brought these amazing speakers today. Any final words? Ken, I don't know if you have any plugs you need to do. Are we hiring? Are you what's the...
We're always hiring. QuestionPro is always hiring. We always have the need for people. And, if you didn't get to check out the product showcase earlier, or if you did and you want to learn more, please ping me. I have a team that's ready to answer the questions and help out.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Manjiri, Nune. We are so glad that you were here today.
Thank you guys for the invite. It's been really fun.
Of course. Chat with you later.
Bye.